A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I'd like to welcome all our guests to today's Tabligh Talk program. As you know, this is the series of programs on various topics, and these programs are arranged by National Tabligh Department with collaboration with Majlis Khudam al-Anbiya UK. This is the sixth program of the series. We have a program on a weekly basis. Every fortnight, we have a program in English, and every week it's in Urdu as well. Today's topic, as you know, is again about the series which we have started about the spirituality. Today's we have Imam Jahangeer Khan Saab with us. I'd like to welcome him on behalf of National Tabligh team, especially on behalf of our National Secretary Ibrahim Ikhlaf Saab, who was unable today to join because of another National Amla meeting with Amir Sahib. So he has sent his salam and Jazakallah to all the guests, especially to Imam Saab, who has given his time. Today's topic is about what we want to discuss is about the different level of spirituality as mentioned in Quran Sharif, but also as explained by Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wassalam. So we start today's program with silent prayer. If I can request Imam Saab to lead us in silent prayer.
Please join me in silent prayer. Allahumma ameen.
Ameen. Jazakallah. So today's program, the format is we're going to have a small presentation, a small talk by Imam Saab on the topic we have discussed. And then we're going to have a question answer session. My colleague Kashif Khan Saab will be hosting or moderating the question answer session. So during the program, during the talk, if you have any questions, you can post them in WhatsApp in the Zoom chat. But also, if you want to ask the question, you can raise your hand or let Kashif Saab know through a direct messaging. So if I can request Imam Saab to start the program.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to all the organizers and all the guests here today. Jazakumullah for being with us once again. As you've heard, the topic for today's lecture is the different states of spirituality or the different levels of spirituality. So I'd like to say straight off that when you speak of states of the soul, you will, of course, remember straight away the philosophy of the teachings of Islam, that extraordinary book which was written by the promised Messiah, alayhi salatu wassalam, in which he explains in a very persuasive manner, based entirely upon the Holy Quran, that there are three states of the soul. There's what's called the an-nafs al-ammara, and there's the second one, which is an-nafs al-lawwama, and the third and final state is an-nafs al-mutma'inna. So the first one, al-ammara, is the soul which incites to evil. So when a person is in that state, they pretty much do anything that their soul tells them to do. So it's this soul which is inclined towards evil deeds and which is inclined towards following one's own instincts, if you wish. So this soul is at a very, very low level of spiritual development. But when realization sets in and a person starts reproaching himself or herself for things that have been done in the past, it becomes a nafs al-lawwama. So that's the soul which is self-reproaching. So it condemns itself and it seeks to repent and it seeks to change for the better. So this is another level through which the soul passes. And finally, after a very long struggle, it reaches the level of an-nafs al-mutma'inna, which is the soul which is satisfied and at peace with God. This is the final level. And at this level, goodness is committed quite naturally. So as the Prophet ﷺ explained, the rewards actually come in the lawama stage. This is a stage which is the second stage, where people are actually struggling to do good. And because they're struggling, Allah also appreciates their struggle and He rewards them in different ways. When they arrive at the stage of mutma'inna, on the other hand, they're no longer struggling. Now they're doing good quite naturally. And therefore they're not rewarded for that anymore, because now it's become their nature to do good. So people sometimes are quite worried when they're at the lawama stage and think that they're still sinning and they're still trying to repent. And they really want to get out of that stage. But as the Prophet ﷺ said, that each stage has its own rewards and its own pleasures. And one of the pleasures of al-lawama is that people are rewarded by Allah, who appreciates the efforts that they're making to overcome their evil tendencies. Now, I would advise everybody to, of course, read the philosophy of the teachings of Islam. It's available on the Al-Islam website. You can also buy it, of course, from wherever books are being sold in nearest to your Jamaat. And most Ahmadis who are adults would have already read this, but if there is anybody who hasn't read it yet, then they really, really should read it. It's also one of those books which should be read again and again. So every so often you should pick it up and read it all over again. And I'm quite certain that a person who will read it several times will find new things in it each time that they read it. But when we speak of different states of spirituality as such, this is something slightly different. So there are the states of the soul, which we've just spoken about, but then there are also the levels and states of spirituality. Now, Allah says very clearly in the Holy Quran that He raises people to different ranks. And when he says ranks, He means mostly spiritual ranks. Like, for example, in verse 76 of chapter 20, Allah says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن يأته مؤمنا قد عمل الصالحات فأولئك لهم الدرجات العلى. Which means, but he who comes to him as a believer, having done good deeds, for such are the highest ranks. So here believers are told that if they do good deeds, deeds which are done in the right way at the right time, then they will receive the highest ranks. We see in verse 20 of chapter 46, وَلِكُلٍّ دَرَجَاتٌ مِمَّا عَمِلُوا وَلِيُوَفِّيَهُمْ أَعْمَالَهُمْ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. And for all, it says, are degrees of rank according to what they did, and that Allah may fully repay them for their deeds, and they shall not be wronged. So again, everybody receives degrees of rank, which is different ranks of spirituality. We see also, and I'm just going to read the translation here, and He it is who has made you successors of others on the earth, and has exalted some of you over the others in degrees of rank, that He may try you by that which He has given you. Surely thy Lord is quick in punishment, and surely He is most forgiving, merciful. And that was from chapter 6, verse 166. Again, Allah is saying that He has exalted some of you above others in degrees of rank. And also we see in verse 22 of chapter 17, behold, how we have exalted some of them over others in the present life, and surely the hereafter shall be greater in degrees of rank and greater in excellence. So just as people have different ranks in this life, they will also have different ranks in the next life, but the differences between those ranks will be far greater in the next life, in the life to come. Now, spiritual development can only take place when a person fights and keeps on defeating Satan more and more. So this is an ongoing fight. And people sometimes wonder what level of spirituality they're at. Nobody actually knows what level they're at unless Allah Himself tells them. The best we have to do is to develop our souls, to develop our capacities and our strengths to be able to defeat Satan in the best way possible, so that we can rise to the highest ranks which are available to us individually. Everybody has their own capacity, their own maximum capacity, but only Allah can help us to reach that. And we should constantly be praying to Allah that He makes us and helps us reach the highest ranks which we are capable of as individuals. Something very interesting has been said, which is the most important thing, because we can talk about different ranks of spirituality, but the really important thing is how do we actually reach that level, which is our personal maximum degree of excellence. How do we do that? That's the most important thing. It's not knowing at which rank this person is at or we ourselves are at. That's something which Allah doesn't have to tell anyone, and that we'll only find out when we go to the next life. What's very important for us, what's vital for us actually, is to know how to actually reach that maximum level of spirituality. So the Prophet ﷺ says, and he's referring here to a verse of the Quran which says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu usbiru wasabiru warabitu wattaqullaha la'allakum tuflihun. O ye who believe, be steadfast and strive to excel in steadfastness, and be on your guard. And another translation for this is, it means station horses at your frontiers to guard them. That means you have to place horses at the frontiers that you have with enemy states, in order to guard those frontiers better. That's the meaning of rabitu. And fear Allah that you may prosper. So here Allah is saying we have to be patient or steadfast, and we also have to strive to excel in steadfastness. So we have to try to make efforts to become better and better at being patient, but also we have to be on our guard and watch our frontiers. Now, what does this mean? So the Prophet ﷺ has elucidated this in a very beautiful way, and he says, and this has been taken from Malfuzat Volume 1. He says the word ribat refers to those horses that are tied at the enemy frontier. Allah the Exalted instructs the companions to remain prepared to fight the enemy. The word ribat draws their attention towards the fact that they should remain fully prepared in all respects. The companions were given two responsibilities. Firstly, to fight their apparent enemies, meaning the worldly enemies, the ones that are physically their enemies, and secondly, a spiritual war. Arabic lexicons state that ribat also refer to a person's soul and heart. A subtle point to note is that only those horses can be brought into service that are schooled and trained. In these days, horses are trained and instructed and schooled and taught, just as children are educated in schools with great care and attention. If they are not trained and taught, they would turn out to be completely useless, and instead of being beneficial, would prove to be dangerous and harmful. There is an indication of the fact that souls, that is a ribat of human beings, ought to be trained as well. Their faculties and strengths ought to function within the limits set by Allah Almighty. Otherwise, they shall not be able to serve in the inner war and battle that wages on at every second and every moment between man and his arch enemy, Satan. In battle, and on the field of battle, in addition to one's physical strength, skill is also necessary. Similarly, human souls must be trained and appropriately taught for this inner war and struggle. Otherwise, as a result, Satan shall gain victory over man. Such a person shall in turn be disgraced and dishonored. For example, if an individual possesses an arsenal of artillery, such as cannons and other guns, etc., but is completely ignorant on the use of these weapons, such a person can never succeed in fighting the enemy. Similarly, if a person is equipped with weapons of war and guns, etc., and knows how to use them, yet they have no strength in their arms, such a person will also be unsuccessful. This demonstrates that merely learning the method and technique required to wield a weapon is also insufficient until a person exercises and trains in order to develop power and strength in their arms. Now, if there were a person who is knowledgeable in the art of swordsmanship, but they have not trained and exercised, upon entering the field of battle after 3 or 4 maneuvers and a few strikes, their arms will fall lifeless and they shall render themselves useless by exhaustion. Ultimately, such a person will fall prey to the enemy out of their own weakness. So this is a very interesting explanation given by the Prophet ﷺ. And in it, he's saying that you need to not only know how to fight Satan, but you also have to train to be able to fight him. It's not enough just to know, for example, that yes, if we pray every day, then we'll be able to defeat Satan. You also have to know how to pray, and then you also have to pray in effect, in actual fact, because if you don't, then you're not training. So the training, the knowledge of how to do it, both of them are very, very important. And this is what will enable us to defeat Satan whenever he tries to attack us, and Satan is trying to attack us all day and all night. Whenever we're conscious, he's trying to attack us. So if we learn how to defeat him and also train and practice this in our battle, in warfare against Satan, then and only then will we be able to defeat him. And when we defeat him, we will keep rising spiritually. As Allah says to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, remember he told us this, that every person who goes to the mosque, his rank is raised with every step that he takes towards the mosque. So therefore, by walking towards the mosque, a person is struggling. They would much rather be doing other things. But because they're struggling to go to the mosque, they're defeating the Satan who's trying to keep them away. And Allah is raising their rank accordingly. So one of his sins is effaced with every step that he takes, and his rank is raised by 1 level. So these are the ways that we can defeat Satan and at the same time have our ranks raised. We may not know where we stand, but at some points in our lives, Allah will tell us that he loves us, that he's with us, that he's our friend and we're his friends. So these are the ways that Allah actually informs the person that they're on a good path, on the right path, and they're advancing towards him in a good way. So I'm not going to belabor this point any further. I think everyone has understood that the most important thing, therefore, is to know what to do to be able to progress and also to practice doing it. It's not enough just knowing or talking about it. We also have to practice it. And that will be akin to knowing how to use weapons and also practicing the use of those weapons so that we can be really ready to affront our arch enemy, who is Satan, and defeat him at every level and have our degrees of excellence raised by Allah. May Allah enable us all to do so. So I'll pass the mic back to Kashif Khan Sahab now for the question and answer session. Jazakumullah.
Jazakallah Jahangeer Sahab. Thank you for enlightening us on the topic of different states of spirituality. We will now move on to the question answer session, which I will be leading. This session is expected to last for around 35 minutes and we'll be ending it just before 6 o'clock. We have been receiving some questions. Please continue to send in your questions, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible during this session. I just would like to remind you the two ways of asking questions. You can either send us a question in the chat feature, and we will pick it up and address it to Imam Sahib, or you can raise your hand on the Zoom chat. I will take a note, and you can speak to Imam Sahib directly and ask your question through the microphone. So, as I mentioned, we have been receiving a lot of questions, and I will now start with the first question. So the question number one is as follows. The promised Messiah ﷺ said in the philosophy of the teachings of Islam that the language of God is Arabic, and this is the language of revelation. Then why did he receive revelation in other languages too?
When we say that the language of Allah is Arabic, it means that Allah's language is clear, because in Arabic itself, the word Arabi means something which is clear and precise and which conveys the proper meaning. But we have to remember that Allah also says that every prophet is raised with the language of his people. And it so happens that the Prophet ﷺ, being raised in India, had different languages around him. It was a multilingual environment. The first language being Urdu, which was the language which surrounded him on a daily basis. And religiously also, that was the language. But also he was surrounded by Punjabi, he was surrounded by English, he was surrounded by different other languages which were important to him in his message to address the people. And not forgetting also that he was addressing this multilingual society, as I'd said. So it's absolutely not at all surprising that he should have received revelations in those other tongues, in those other languages. However, he received a lot of revelations in the Arabic tongue. And that's because that is the mother tongue, the language from which all other languages have derived, ultimately. And the final message of Allah was sent in that mother tongue so that nobody could say that they had nothing to do with that. Had it been revealed in any other language, then some people on earth could have said, well, we have nothing to do with that language. But since it's the mother tongue itself, everybody now knows that that is addressed to them and that they are concerned by this. So, but because of the situation where he was raised, it was important that he received revelations in other languages too.
The next question is, some Christians allege that Imran in the Quran, father of Mary, is actually Imran, father of Moses, and that the Quran confuses between Mary and Maryam. Also, is there another verse which says Mary, daughter of Imran? How can we best answer it?
You see, we have to remember the Semitic style. It's a cultural thing as well of appellation, of naming people. For example, when people address Mary, when she returns with Jesus in her arms, peace be upon him, and people say, oh, sister of Aaron, what have you done there? So many Christians and atheists will immediately jump on that and say, well, there you go. Aaron came hundreds of years before Jesus did, and yet the Quran is calling her sister of Aaron. But they forget that actually Aaron had a sister called Maryam, or Miriam in Hebrew. And therefore, any person who was called Maryam would be also called sister of Aaron, because that will remind people that they mean Maryam. And this is a very Semitic thing. In Arabic also, it's used quite a bit. So if you have a name of somebody in the past, they might remind you of that person after whom you were named by referring to him, but speaking to you. So that's something cultural. Therefore, the people who pass these comments, they don't understand how Semitic culture works, unfortunately. Another example of this is and this is Hazrat Khalifa Rabi rahimahullah who explained this, when the messengers came to visit Abraham, peace be upon him, to tell him that the town of the Prophet Lot was going to be destroyed, peace be upon him. And he had offered them food which they had refused to partake of. And the Quran says that he was immediately frightened when he saw that. And again, people don't realize that, you know, from a Western perspective in particular, or a non-Semitic perspective, they don't realize that there's a cultural thing going on there. And it is that in the Semitic peoples, if somebody drinks from the water you offer them or eats from your food, they can't be your enemy. So if they refuse to either drink or eat at your home, it means that they have feelings of enmity towards you, and you can only expect something bad from them. So that's why he was frightened of them, as they had refused the food. And this is why when Saladin, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, when he had refused to give water to one of the enemies, the Christians who had attacked the Holy Land, Christian commentators who don't know this Semitic culture, they said, look how cruel he was. You know, even when somebody was about to perhaps be put to death, he refused to give them water. But what he was doing was that if he had given them water, then that person would no longer be considered an enemy, whereas he needed to be punished. So therefore, he was just following the normal Semitic convention of hospitality and of what it meant as well, as I just explained. So these are actually things which need to be understood in the cultural context, so that they could be commentated upon in the best way.
Jazakallah. The next question is, how can one tell whether his state of spirituality is increasing?
Well, as I said, it's very difficult for a person to gauge where they're at exactly, because only Allah knows this, and He is the one who can choose to tell someone, you know, how close he is to Him or not. So that's for Allah to know. But however, if somebody is progressing, then they themselves will realize that, for example, sins of the past, they're no longer committing them. So that will mean that they have had the upper hand in that domain. They have been victorious in that domain. And if they've been victorious in any domain with regard to a sin or weakness, that means that their level must have been raised. So they should kind of read those signs. The signs are read in the practical manner, meaning that they can see themselves if they're better people, if they're becoming better, they're abandoning more and more evil, and they're adopting more and more good deeds. They're, you know, receiving the strength to do even better deeds than before. Then their rank is probably most likely being raised. But we don't know for sure, only Allah knows. And we should just be worried about trying our best at all times and not damaging our souls by returning to the sins of the past. Every time we sin, our soul is damaged in whichever way it happens. So it would be very silly if we could see our souls. It would be like we could see ourselves stabbing our souls every time we sinned. If we said something bad about someone, for example, or thought evil about them, we'd be stabbing ourselves. And that's how it might appear if we could actually see our souls physically. So we always have to bear that in mind. Try to not damage or hurt our souls. Try to heal our souls and make them become more beautiful by doing good deeds and keeping away from evil.
Jazakallah. There are two questions which are similar, so I'm going to combine them. Essentially, the first question is, you said that an ordinary person has a certain spiritual capacity. So the question is, what can we do to reach Nafs Mutmainah? And the other question, which is similar, is asking, if you have reached the spiritual state of Nafs Mutmainah, then how do you keep progressing spiritually?
You see, our job is to keep struggling. We have to keep struggling towards Allah to gain Allah's pleasure, to do what Allah wants us to do, because He knows what's best for us, and we trust Him. Why do we trust Him? It's because He's true in His promises. He says things will happen, and they do. So we trust Him for the rest that we can't see. So that's our job. Now, if we're at the level of Mutma'innah, then only it's Allah who knows how a soul at the level of Mutma'innah is progressing. That's of His His domain of knowledge. It's not ours. So if we've reached that state, I think we should be happy, and that should be quite enough, rather than to know, how far into that we've gone. But what we should do is to pray, as I'd said during the lecture, that Allah help us to reach our full potential, because only Allah can make us do that. We can't do it by our own efforts. No effort can bring any fruit, bear any fruit, unless Allah's grace accompanies it. All depends on His grace ultimately. So we should ask Allah to help us to do what He wants us to do, so that we can reach the highest levels of our excellence that we can ever attain according to our individual capacity.
Jazakallah. The next question is, does the acceptance of prayer differ in the three states of nafs that you described?
Well, when somebody is very, very much closer to Allah, obviously Allah will answer his prayers far more. I mean, that's kind of a given. So the closer a person is to Allah, obviously he's going to respond in kind. And as the Hadith Qudsi says, that I am to my servant according to what he thinks of me. So if a person has a very, very, excellent knowledge of who Allah is and how he behaves and functions, that person, Allah will reveal Himself to him accordingly. If a person has poor knowledge of Allah and doesn't have very good thoughts of Him, Allah will also manifest Himself to that person in the same way, accordingly. So therefore, we have to reflect on that, to be able to understand this question.
Jazakallah. The next question is, non-Ahmadis and non-Muslims don't believe that Jesus ﷺ traveled to India and died a natural death and buried in Srinagar. How can we convince them?
Well, we can't convince anybody. We can only tell them to reflect on what's more logical. Is it more logical that he would have gone somewhere where the children of Israel were? Because remember, when he appeared in the Holy Land, there were only one full tribe of Judah out of the 12 tribes, and a part of the tribe of Benjamin, who was still in the Holy Land. All the other tribes, meaning 10 and a large part of Benjamin, had gone towards the east. So is it more logical that he would have gone to see them when the Quran says that he was Rasulun ila Bani Israel? He was a messenger for the children of Israel, not for one tribe, but all 12. Or is it more logical that he would have started to rise into space, into outer space? Where did he go from there? How fast did he travel? Is Allah somewhere in space? Na'udhu billah. Or is he beyond space? And if he's beyond space, then even if Jesus were traveling at the speed of light, which is impossible for a human body, then he would still be traveling. He wouldn't have, even after 2,000 years, he wouldn't have reached the end of space yet. So it's a totally superstitious belief, a belief which is shared, may I remind guests here, by Hindus, Christians, and Jews as well. The Jews said that Elijah was raised up into the heavens, and the Hindus also believe that there's one person who was raised up into the heavens, and they depict that in different images, etc. And the Christians, of course, say that Jesus himself was raised into the heavens. So this is a belief which the Sunnis and Shias share with them. We don't adhere to that because it's illogical and it's unscientific and it's not possible. And just saying that Allah can do whatever He wills does not solve that problem, because Allah Himself never breaks His own laws. And He also, when He says that somebody has come for a whole people, He can't take him up into space, whereas more than, the larger part, more than 10 tribes hadn't actually heard Jesus's message directly. So that isn't logical at all. So they should be invited to reflect on these things and see what is the more logical and the more reasonable, scenario. They should consider that.
Jazakallah. The next question is, why does the Quran quote different sentences as revelations for the same event in the story of Noah and Moses alayhi salam?
Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
Yeah, it says a question is asking, why does the Quran quote different sentences as revelations for the same event in the story of Noah and Moses?
Well, maybe because different revelations were sent to them, which were varied, and so they're being taken up again by the Holy Quran. As we know, in the case of the Prophet ﷺ, he's received similar revelations about the same things, but in slightly different words. Allah is not bound to say everything exactly the same way. When He wants, He can say it in a slightly different way. But there's always if there's a difference, there's always a hidden meaning in there, which maybe Allah is drawing our attention to. Just by changing a word or two, it might mean that He's drawing our attention to a point, which is a novel point or a different point. So we should ponder on that. So actually, this is a good question. If they've noticed differences, they're not there for no reason. They're there for a very good reason, and they should try and read all the commentaries to see what that reason is.
Exactly. Next question is, last time you said that instead of approaching someone first, one should pray to God that He sends people who are receptive to the message. So should one always use this approach even with friends or people you know, or should we start the conversation with them?
Well, it depends on the situation. If you haven't got anyone to preach to, you should ask Allah to send such people. If you have people whom you think you can preach to, then you should pray to Allah and say that Allah make these people in particular be of the ones who are receptive and who will accept. Because Allah can change their hearts if He wishes. If they have any goodness in them, maybe this prayer will trigger Allah's mercy in their favor, and then He will allow their hearts to become receptive. Or maybe He will create a situation which will occur, which will make the friend ask for something to do with the truth of our religion. So sometimes Allah can orchestrate these events so that the person has a chance to hear the truth. Some event might happen, some incident might occur, an accident might occur, you know, there might be a loss of some kind. Something might trigger their desire to find out more about the meaning of life, why they're here and where they're going. So we should you know, modify our prayers accordingly. Obviously, depends on the situation.
Jazakallah. Next question is, how can we prove to atheists that soul or spirituality exists?
How can we prove it to them?
Yeah.
If you can show them that we have knowledge of things of the future which human beings cannot know, cannot you know, bring forward by themselves, that in itself should be something which will draw their attention to these phenomena which are not explicable by physical means. So we don't need to go into great detail about this, but we always talk about dreams and visions and revelations and prophecies. So these are the things which cannot be explained by physical means. No human being can know something that's going to happen in the future, you know, even on the same day sometimes, let alone in like a week's time or in a year's time or in 10 years' time. One particular example is, which I'd mentioned before, probably in one of these programs, is that there were so many people who claim to have seen prophets of the past in their dreams. So some say they'd seen Jesus, some say they'd seen Buddha, others say they'd seen Krishna, or even Mary or saints or something. And they say, well, everybody sees these things. And we say, but it's not exactly the same when people in a country where they had never heard or seen the Prophet Muhammad's picture before, see him in a dream, and several years later, they realize when they meet Ahmadis that they knew that person from their dream. And this has been the means of bringing many, many people, thousands of people, to Ahmadiyya. Because there are pictures of Buddha which are spread around, pictures of Jesus, pictures of Krishna, pictures of others. So if people see these things, it's very subjective, as they've already seen these things and they might then see them in their dreams, and that would not have much meaning. But if somebody sees a person who they've never seen before nor heard of, then that takes on a whole new meaning. It's a totally different phenomenon. And these are things which should be, which atheists should be attracted towards, and they should be told to reflect on that and to try to find explanations for these things. And you'll find that they don't usually have any explanation because there aren't any, other than there's an intelligence which is superior to ours, and it's in contact with human beings, and it has powers which human beings do not have. And these are matters which relate to spirituality and therefore to the soul. So these are different ways in which we can attract atheists to understand the meaning of the soul.
Jazakallah. The next question is slightly long, but is as follows. We as Ahmadis are fortunate to have been able to accept all the prophets and the promised Messiah. Islam. The human race is thousands of years old. Many people would have passed without seeing a prophet or God's message preached to them. And even today, there are communities that live in jungles and would know nothing about religion. It is not their fault that they have not been preached and the true message and purpose of their creation. How will God judge them?
God said that he will never be unjust to anybody. He will not be unjust to them even in a tiny little amount at all. He says this in the Holy Quran. He will, of course, judge people according to their own capacity. He will not burden them beyond their capacity. Luckily for us, it's not human beings who will be judging other people on the Day of Judgment. It will be the one who knows every innermost thought of every person he's ever created, who is Allah. So he will judge people according to their own circumstances. He will not judge people according to the knowledge and level of others. Everybody will be judged according to their own parameters and their own, how do I say that? The own details that pertain to their own lives, their own characteristics, their own knowledge, their own capacities, and their own behavior. So nobody has to be worried about being judged according to levels that belong to other people. That won't happen.
Jazakallah. The next question is, how will life on other planets come to know about Allah's prophets, especially Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the promised Messiah ﷺ?
Well, if we ever meet them, I suppose at some point we're going to talk about that, if we can communicate. And I think we probably will be able to communicate. Otherwise, mentioning that in the Holy Quran wouldn't really be of any meaning. So there must surely be some form of communication which will be established. But when we say that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is a mercy for all the not only the universe but all the universes, it doesn't mean and doesn't follow from that other creatures who are not human will have to follow his law. This law has been made specifically for human beings. So he will be a mercy for them in the sense that human beings following his teachings will do no harm to extraterrestrials who are conscious and like us on other planets. And then, because we will behave well towards them, they will benefit from the teachings of mercy of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and therefore he will become a mercy for them too, but indirectly, not directly, because they will have their own prophets and they will have their own religious systems. And I remember, and you might have seen, many of you might have seen this, once a child asked Hazrat Khalifa al-Abi rahimahullah this very question. He said that, well, it's slightly different, but the same topic. He said, do extraterrestrials have prophets and caliphs like we do? And Hazrat said, well, maybe they do. He said, who knows? He said, maybe there's an extraterrestrial child asking an extraterrestrial caliph this very question right now. So every creature has its own system adapted to its own body and its own soul, and ours is only for us, as far as we know.
Jazakallah. The next question is, how is the electoral college chosen and who selects the members eligible or worthy of becoming the Khalifa? And can the Khalifa ever make a mistake?
Okay, that's a very vast kind of a question here. Not quite sure how this relates to spirituality, but anyway. The Electoral College usually, as set down in the rules and regulations of the Jamaat, is comprised of the higher officials of the Jamaat and as representatives who are the Amirs, who are from all over the world. Whoever manages to get there on time, wherever the election is taking place, they will be included. And also there will be higher ranking or more senior, if you wish, missionaries who could also be included. Sometimes the list is prepared by the previous caliph himself for the next caliph's election. And that was the case with the fourth Khalifa, rahimahullah, who prepared a list for the election for the fifth Khalifa. So this is how the people are chosen. And these are the representatives of the different departments and the different nations within the Jamaat. Now, as far as the second part was concerned, could you just repeat it again, please? Can you make a mistake?
Yes.
So once, not once, many times this question has been asked from Hazrat Rabi, and if I'm not mistaken, from Hazrat Khamis as well. But can a caliph make a mistake? And the answer is always that, look, any human being can make a mistake, and a caliph can also make a mistake. But the difference is that Allah will make that mistake become something good. And it will never happen that a mistake in judgment made by a caliph will bring harm to the Jamaat. It will never happen. Allah will make this mistake turn into a blessing somehow. And this is the difference between our caliphs and the Pope, for example. In Catholicism, it's said that the Pope is infallible, meaning he can't even make a mistake. But of course, now even the popes themselves, they admit that this isn't true. And if they make a mistake, God doesn't do anything to right it. But for his own caliphs, Allah intervenes and he makes the mistake become something good. So in the end, it's not really a mistake at all. It's just a human weakness. Maybe some information had been conveyed incorrectly and the Khalifa had made a decision accordingly. But then Allah makes the result of it all become something good for the Jamaat. It will never ever bring harm or cause harm to the Jamaat, ever.
The next question is, there are people in the world, Muslims and non-Muslims, who claim to have gained certain power and seen the unseen. Can this power be obtained, and has that anything to do with spirituality? Because people who deny the prophets of God also claim to have this power.
People who claim to have knowledge of the unseen are liars. They are absolute liars, and they can be, of course, they can be exposed, and they are exposed. There are people who specialize in exposing these fraudsters, and documentaries have been made on this topic as well. But what we say is not that. We don't say that we have knowledge of the unseen. We say that Allah shares some of that knowledge with us whenever He so pleases, and this was one of the blessings which He gave to the followers of the Promised Messiah, that not only the men but also their women and their children even will prophesy, and they will say things which Allah has conveyed to them, which will happen in the future. But that doesn't mean that Ahmadis have the power to know that all by themselves. Not at all. It's a gift which is offered by Allah whenever He wants, and the aim of it is to strengthen the belief of people who find out about whatever matter it pertained to. So this is all it is. So our claim is not that we know the unseen. Even the prophets never claim that. They say only Allah knows. But Allah shares that knowledge with them to some degree, and also to some degree to their followers too. So this is the phenomenon that we're seeing within the Ahmadiyya community. Outside the community, nobody can claim to know that unless they are absolute fraudsters and liars. So only these types of people will do it, and they also always mostly they'll have an ulterior motive, which is usually to have money and power and control over people, and this is why they make such claims.
We've got time for 2 more questions. So the second last question is, if a fairly religious person performs all the obligatory injunctions of Islam, like prayers, Ramadan, zakat, fasting, etc., but is bereft of ilham, revelation, then should he or she be worried about and pray for receiving ilham?
You see, when we're going to be judged in the hereafter, nobody is going to ask any person, no, the angels won't be asking, how many revelations did you have? How many dreams did you see? How many visions did you have? These are not the questions which are going to be asked, because these are Allah's gifts, as I just said. These are not things which we made efforts for. They're just given by Allah whenever He so pleases. What we will be asked is, how well did we pray, for example? And as I had mentioned before, I'm not sure if it was in this series of programs or not, but one of the companions once of the Prophet ﷺ once said that he had seen in a dream that Ahmadis were being questioned on the Day of Judgment, and they were being asked only 2 things in that dream, at least. He said they were asked, did you do Tabligh? And secondly, did you pay Chanda? These are the 2 major struggles for Ahmadis, and Ahmadis are going to be asked about this. because these are two things which the Prophet ﷺ has asked every Ahmadi to do, to convey the message of truth around to the world and to take part in the financial sacrifice, in this jihad of financial sacrifices, so that the message of truth can be spread all over the world. Because this requires financing. We need to build mosques, we need to send out missionaries, we need to print books, we need to run mission houses, we have to hold events and all these things, and all this takes money. So this is the way to participate. And if we were remiss in either of these tasks, we will be questioned about them on the Day of Judgment.
Jazakallah. And I think we've got time for one more question. The question is, I'm not sure whether I understood the question fully, but I think the question is asking that the promised Messiah received revelation about certain numbers. What is the significance of what does that mean? I think that's what the question is asking.
He received revelation regarding certain numbers?
Yes, that's what the question is asking.
Well, in the Arabic language, numbers have meanings because they have numerical letters have numerical values, and therefore when we see letters, which like the muqatta'at, for example, those letters like alif, lam, mim, ha, mim, etc. in the Holy Quran, when we see these, we usually interpret them by giving them. There are different ways, of course, to interpret them, but one of the ways is to examine their numerical values according to the abjad values which are attributed to them. And this is a common thing in Semitic languages. It's also done in Hebrew. And often you'll see that there are hidden prophecies within those numbers. Now, one very interesting thing which Allah told the Prophet ﷺ is that if he adds up all the letters making the name Mirza Ghulam Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani, if he adds up the letters of Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani, and remember, Mirza was his surname, but his actual name was Ghulam Ahmad, and he's known as Qadiani. Everybody, even our enemies, call us Qadiani today, as you know. So if he adds up those letters, it will amount to exactly 1,300. I actually tested that out personally, and it's true. It's 1,300, and that was in itself a prophecy that he had come to be the Imam Mahdi at the head of the 14th century. When 1,300 years would have passed, he would announce that he is the Mahdi, and he would appear, therefore, when the 1,300 years had passed, and he'd be in the beginning of the 14th century. So this was a very big prophecy, and it was hidden in his name, and nobody could have thought, of course, he himself, he could not have gone back in time to make his parents name him the way they named him. This is beyond human power and capacity. So therefore, this is one example of why there are numbers. But there might be, of course, other revelations with other numbers, and that would have to be examined according to the case.
Jazakallah. And that's the end of the question and answer session. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. We had many more questions to answer. But we will continue doing so in our next session. I will hand back to Musawwir Sahab, to the host, just to finish off today's program.
Assalamu alaikum, Jazakallah, Kashif, and Jazakallah to Imam Sahab once again for enlightening us with the knowledge. I hope that everyone who has joined today has enjoyed the question session and also the talk. Just for a reminder, inshallah, we're going to have the same program in Urdu next week on Sunday, 5 o'clock. And then the following week, we're going to have our final program of this session on the topic of the spirituality on the Sunday. So I hope that our guests who have joined us today will be joining us again next week. And then also spread the message and spread the word out to your families, to your friends, so they can benefit from this very informative program as well. So Jazakallah to everyone. Jazakallah, Imam Sahab. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.